Hello, I'm Stuart Bowes, and you're watching or listening to the Net Hero podcast. This is a podcast for you if you care about what we're doing to the planet. You don't have to be an eco-warrior. We believe business is the solution to making things better. But we're for people who want to make that difference by either cutting their emissions or coming up with ideas that can help us do things a bit better. We've featured politicians, academics, lots and lots of business people, entrepreneurs, inventors, and of course people who are just interested in doing the right thing. So sit back, listen and enjoy, and make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Please share it with your friends and colleagues, and you can always check out our two websites that cover all of this, Energy Live News and futurenetzero.com. This podcast is purely editorial, so sit back and enjoy this week's episode. Hello, welcome to the Net Hero podcast. A lighter way to fly. Actually, that's pants, isn't it? But I can't think of any good puns around helium, apart from young people taking it, which is very bad. Don't do that. But helium is the gas that we all probably know from the party balloons that we give to kids. It's in hospitals. It's a naturally occurring thing. It's part of what the sun does. It squashes it up and powers the world. So it's one of those elements that we kind of take it as a kind of fun element that has, probably enhanced our lives, not quite much, maybe kind of old days, transport, things like Zeppelins. But does it have a crucial role now in our net zero future? Is it something that we could look at to help us improve efficiencies in net zero technologies? Could it be something that we could use to try and reduce emissions? Well, that's what a company called Pulsar Helium is looking into. And I'm delighted to say from New Prague in the USA, which is a great name for a place, I'm joined by the CEO, Thomas Abraham James. Thomas, how are you, mate?
Doing well. Look, thank you very much for having me. And going back to your initial conundrum, what's the intro? Helium, it's a buoyant commodity.
Oh, I like it.
We can start with that one. There we go.
You've lightened this conversation already.
But yes, greetings from New Prague. I tell you what, it's a chilly. You don't need helium over here. It's cryogenically cold as it is outside. So it's a balmy minus 20 here today.
Oh, so which part of the world are you in then? Where is New?
So it's just south of Minneapolis in Minnesota.
Oh, yeah, it'd be pretty cold. Yeah, absolutely. So, and also apologies, ladies and gents, if you have any visual problems, because his curtains are pretty strong. So, but if you're listening to the podcast, don't worry. Look, you're a geologist, so let's do a little geology 101. Well, what is helium? I've given a kind of idiot's idea of what it is, but what is helium? Kind of, most of us know it's a gas. And where do you find it?
Okay, helium's a gas. It's the second lightest element on the periodic table, so it's something that is naturally occurring in nature, and it's extracted in a gas form. So you could think of it a bit like, say, natural gas or hydrocarbons, where it's trapped in a reservoir. Except for helium, we look for helium where it's in a reservoir, but it's the primary commodity that's there. So it's a relatively new industry. It's only about 10 years old, and that's with a recent increased demand for helium. But as of today and historically, more than 95% of the world's helium production comes as a byproduct of natural gas production. And so we're looking to change that. And where do you find it? Sometimes you do find it mixed with the natural gas, as we see. However, they do come from two completely different locations. So natural gas, hydrocarbons is organic material, whereas helium is not. So you've got two different isotopes. One, which is the primordial helium, which is what we have out there floating around the universe. But it does like to escape our atmosphere. Whereas the most abundant form of helium here on Earth is helium-4, the other isotope, and that is formed from radiogenic decay. So uranium, thorium, breaking down half-lives. What it does is it creates an alpha particle, and that alpha particle is helium.
So the helium that we've got in the Earth is from the uranium, the radioactive rocks. It's just naturally released as they decay. That's where it's from, yeah?
That's right, exactly right. And then they start to, those atoms then start to migrate around, and then they end up in a reservoir. And that reservoir may have hydrocarbons in it, it may not. And we look for the ones that are not.
Because this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, it's inert, isn't it, helium? I remember it from school. It doesn't explode, doesn't do anything. Hence you'd stick it in a blimp now rather than hydrogen as it went 100 years ago. But I don't really know much about it really. I mean, yes, it kind of is it a bit in laughing gas or is that nitrous oxide? Is it just in party balloons? Before we go into the science of where it is now going to be, where would we
Mm.
come across helium over the last sort of 50, 60 years, apart from just lifting things?
Its applications have changed quite a lot. Probably in the past, I'd say 20 to 30 years. Prior to that, its major application was lifting, so balloons, zeppelins, as you say, and then some sort of obscure scientific R&D. But helium, it is, yeah, non-toxic. It's inert. Uh, we can't get it to freeze either, so we
Wow.
can get it down to just below absolute zero. It's still a liquid, whereas everything else is frozen. So the mindset, this is where its applications have increased, particularly with technology. So, balloons, it's a small fraction of the use, less than 5% of the application, but the rest is now technology because of its unique properties. It's non-combustible, something really cool. So for cryogenic applications, and that's where we're starting to see the uptick. So I guess you could say we can't see much of it, but pretty much everything we use, including what I'm talking to you on right now, we wouldn't have it without helium. It's the commodity we never knew that we relied upon.
That's incredible. So it's in the computer that you and I are talking to right now, is it?
It was used in the fabrication process, so for semiconductors. So you need liquid helium in order to make the wafers for the semiconductors.
The thing people have seen, right? We've seen it in movies and we've probably seen it in laboratories or we've seen it around is liquid nitrogen. Everyone kind of knows about it, right? So the first thing you see is CO2, liquid CO2, which is, in the discos I used to go to in the 80s, that was a big thing. Dry ice, people know that. And obviously in theatre and film. And then liquid nitrogen has a big role in medicine. People know about kind of freezing embryos, that's all that. But you don't hear about people using liquid helium. Is that
Mm.
simply because there's not that much of it? If it's that good, why is it not been used to, for example, in biology to freeze things?
The supply has been constrained for about a decade now, which is one of the reasons
Wow.
why my company exists. So really, it's got to the point now where demand has outstripped supply. Supply has actually become very disrupted, and so a lot of industries that use it for tech, it's a small component in a bigger spectrum of what they have. And with that uncertainty of getting product, you don't see like sometimes it's like, okay, we can't proceed with this technology because there is a supply chain risk for helium. And so we see that we can't just readily use it as much as we would like to. And that is a huge problem.
So, very bad question to ask you, and I apologize, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How much, like, what sort of percentage of the Earth has got helium in it? So is it 5% of rocks, 10%? Do we have any clue at all?
In the atmosphere, it's 5 parts per million.
Right.
So with a lot of industrial gases, we get them from the air that we breathe. We use a thing called an air separation unit, and that strips out oxygen, argon, so on. But for helium, it's too low concentration. Then you get into the ground, and in rocks, you're probably looking at parts per trillion levels, so very low abundances. But then when you start to get across to gas reservoirs,
Yeah.
then it starts to get interesting if you've got, say, 0.3% of the gas is helium or higher, then it starts to get interesting.
So it is tiny, right? Because there was an article we published the other day on Future Net Zero and in ELN, Energy Lab News, all about kind of how much untapped hydrogen there is that could really help us,
Mm,
naturally occurring. So what you're talking is tiny
mm.
fractions of this, isn't it? It's not as abundant as other elements.
No, it really isn't. It's quite hard to explore for, to be honest. And this is why I'm here in New Prague at the moment in the USA. I mean, we found an occurrence where the gas is over 10% helium,
Wow, that's like
which is just phenomenal. We're very happy. We're very happy with that.
it's a
So it's
gold
like,
rush, a helium rush.
it is. And but once again, like 10 years ago, I got into the helium game and we started for the first time looking for this. And there's only a few places on the planet has let's call it the Goldilocks zone of where you do get that high concentration helium. And it seems to be limited at the moment to North America and East Africa. Outside of those two, can't find much else.
So there's not much in Godalming then. Yeah, can't go down the back end.
No, no, people have been looking.
Or here in Barnet. I got a lot of bogs in Barnet. I thought I might be able to get. Let's talk about Pulsar, what you're doing there. So let's do the applications, and then we'll talk about what you're particularly doing. So you said initially it could be used in fabrication of things like silicon microchips. Will
Mhm.
it go, and what could it be used for in our net zero future? So could it be used in wind power? Can it be used to make solar? What sort of things could helium be used to? And what would its advantage be in kind of reducing the emissions footprint of any of these new clean technologies? Because they've always got an embedded footprint, haven't they?
Yeah, the big thing is that helium can assist with, I would call it efficiency, is the big one. So if we start look at, yeah, okay, yes, it's using the fabrication of semiconductors or fiber optic cables. Great, that's standard manufacturing
Yeah.
process. But where we can start to see efficiency improvements is leak detection is one thing. So the formation of batteries for EVs and whatnot.
Ah,
Helium's used as a leak detection because it's so small, and it's easy to detect. So you can imagine if you purge a system with helium, and if you have a sensor on the other side, there must be a leak if you're detecting helium because there's so few atoms of it in the atmosphere. So that's one. But the probably the biggest ones are for energy. So one is the next iteration of reactors that are being designed and starting to be fabricated use liquid helium. So it's a cooling agent. So that's there for safety as well, but then also for absorption of any radioactive materials. And then for data centers, data centers is probably the big one. So the AI boom, existing cloud, right? So two ways it's being utilized there. So one is for the older hard drives, the disks that spin, is that you replace the atmosphere with helium, so then they spin a lot more freely, less energy, less friction, more efficiency, less electrical drawdown. And then the other one is the big data centers themselves to keep them cool with helium systems, so the energy requirement is less. And seeing some of the forecasts for energy demand for just for data centers alone is actually quite scary, to be honest. And so helium may well play a role in helping that.
do you see it as an energy source in itself? Probably not, then, from what you're saying.
No, not with the most abundant ones. So helium-4, so going back to those two isotopes, helium-4 not so, but helium-3, yes. And that is incredibly rare on Earth. We only have a little bit, but this is used in, this is like cold fusion that we're getting at, right? So
Yeah.
if there's an abundance of helium-3, then that is something that could really be used for energy. So at the moment, we know that there's some plans out there to strip mine the moon because the
Yeah.
moon's got a lot of helium-3. But here on Earth,
Yeah. Why do you think they're all going to the moon? Yeah, exactly.
so what we hope we can offer is an alternative that might be slightly cheaper and easier than going to the moon.
Because I mean, the fusion. I'm a big fan of fusion. We've had it on the podcast. We've talked to experts, and it is happening. I don't. I know that people will shoot me down and go, "Oh, what are you talking about?" It will happen. I think there's lots of investment, but obviously, the cost of it is the science is there. It's the cost of it. And some people say that helium could be part of that, but that would be that rare form. What sort of isotope did you call it? Helium-3, did you say?
Helium-3,
Yeah. So that's quite rare.
extremely rare, extremely rare. And then it's in such low abundance, you could find it, say, in a gas form, which it has been found, but it's there. And it's a bit, the analogy I use is we know that the ocean, the seawater has got lots of gold. How are we going to get the gold out of the seawater? And it's a bit like this.
Yeah.
Okay, there's helium-3 in a gas form, but I think the cost and the technology for getting it out is just prohibitive and probably non-existent.
So what are you doing at Pulsar? Talk me through what you're doing apart from staying in dodgy hotels in freezing temperatures.
I don't know what you mean. This was lovely, mate. This is one of the better ones. Although I did have a rubbish night's sleep last night, I
There
must
you go.
admit. So yeah, look, what we're trying to do is we're dedicated to finding new sources of helium where it's the primary economic driver, not associated with hydrocarbons. And
I want to make this quite clear. So you're not going to go and say, like the big criticism of hydrogen is, oh, it's just a byproduct of the fossil fuel industry. You're trying to go and get it where it's not associated with digging up fossil fuel and gas and oil.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right. So if we find appreciable quantities of hydrocarbons, that means that we have failed and that we move on to something else. And it's really twofold for two reasons.
Sorry to interrupt you. So even if you
Mm,
found helium there, you would
hmm.
not go for it because it's with hydrocarbons.
That's right. Yeah.
Why?
Two things. So then you become an energy company, and then you have to find a home for the hydrocarbons, and then the helium becomes second fiddle to the hydrocarbons. You can't do anything with the helium until you've found a home for the hydrocarbons, and it's really quite a different business model to what we have. And then also it doesn't really fix anything either. So one
Yeah,
is more than
very true.
95% of the world's helium is a byproduct already, and then the other thing is there's no flexibility with that model. This is probably one of the biggest things. So production is unstable at the moment. USA in particular, where I am now, is in decline. And the problem is, like, let's say you're a purchaser of helium, right? And it's like, okay, I'm a natural gas company and I
Yeah.
produce helium at the rate that I produce my natural gas. So that means in our contract, which could be 10 years long, is that every week you're going to get a container of helium if you like it or not. Now, if you don't have any capacity to use it, helium will start to leak out of that container and be wasted and it's gone. The other thing is that you call me up one day, say, hey, Tom, I actually need a double load this week. Things are really busy. And I said, I'm terribly sorry, I can't give it to you. So, we're really tied here at the moment. Whereas if we could get a sizable primary helium source up and running, it has the potential to become the flywheel in the system. All of a sudden, when you call me up, I'll say, "Of course, no problem. We can look after you." Or, "Oh, you don't need it this week? No pressure. That's fine. We can give you flexibility." And so then all of a sudden, big manufacturing, technology, R&D, all of a sudden they could breathe a sigh of relief and say, "Actually, maybe we can now start to include a bit more helium in our supply chain or technologies." Whereas at the moment, that flexibility is not there, and helium. It's notorious for small atomic size leak detection. It likes to leak. So for us, the storage is actually the reservoir itself, whereas we can't just go and put it into a container or a big storage
I
facility and
was going
leave
to
it
ask,
there.
yeah. So you couldn't put it into a big like sealed drum or anything because it would just it's that small. It can what leak out between the metal atoms, can it? Or I mean, that sounds crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's so in a gas form, okay, you could store it for a while in cylinders, but in a liquid form, which is the one that's required for a lot of tech, this thing's under high pressure, and it's got so typically the vessel that it's in would have liquid helium, and then around that it would have a layer of liquid nitrogen. So it's a glorified thermos flask, if you will,
Oh, gotcha.
right? And so that's to be able to transport it and have a decent volume. So it's a trade-off between steel integrity and volume of material. And so then with the larger ones, so the 40-foot containers, is that if the helium's in there for, say, longer than a month, that's when it starts to probably find its way out and you start losing product.
Amazing.
Mm.
So I like what you're doing, and I think it's really good. But then people will be listening, and go, "Well, he's still going to have to dig stuff up. So you're still going to have to extract, whether it's digging for black stuff or digging for colorless, lovely stuff. That's still causing disruption. How do you get it out? Do you have to dig for it, or are you exploring cleaner ways to extract this hydrogen, this helium?
We have a real opportunity here to do should we get into production, which is certainly what we're working on in our project here in Minnesota, is that we have a real opportunity here to make it more than 95% of the world's helium is currently byproduct of hydrocarbons. So already we've got a head start from that. So let's build on that. The only consumable that's required in order to process the gas and get a pure helium product is electricity. So we don't use water, we don't use chemicals. With the drilling that we do, so it's not digging holes, it's not pits or anything like that. It's simply a well going down, a glorified water well, let's call it water bore. And so then the gas naturally comes up to surface. There's no fracking, there's no chemicals, there's nothing like that. And then at surface, because the volumes that we're talking about too for helium, it's not like natural gas. I mean, to be a huge producer of helium, it's one 40-foot container of helium per day. And that's huge
Wow,
production, right?
tiny.
And so that you could just imagine the footprint for a processing facility. And this is where, we're really happy with our asset because it's so high concentration, over 10% helium. So that would mean in a production scenario, you're actually not processing that much gas in order to get your final product. And really, with electricity, as the only consumable. Everything would be right there at the wellhead, and there's no pipelines. And then at the end of the day, one truck would go out, and that would be, containing the product. So it's a very neat, clean operation.
I know you've got funding and you've been getting investors. Where are you in the stage of actually getting some of this stuff out? And first of all, you say you're over in America and you possibly found a site, but it can't be that easy. You've got to do lots of analysis, I assume. So, what's the next stages?
Okay, so we've made the discovery. We've drilled. It's there, and we have a feel that this right now, drilling some additional wells. Those will give us more information. So really, the stage is we're at the de-risking phase. So discovery's been made. Now we need to find out how big is it, make the level of confidence high for a portion of the resource, which could then justify the few $1 million it's going to need to then put in a processing plant and go into production. So we're on that pathway to determine how viable this can be, and I must admit, very pleased with how it's been going so far.
So you'd have your site where and obviously I don't want you. It's like the X marks the map, but you found it somewhere, and I'm assuming there's a bit of land or wherever it is. Um, would you eventually just be able, if you said what the diameters and the sort of volumes you're doing, you don't need a big thing. Could you just
Mhm.
basically build your extraction point and your plant on the same site, or would you
Yeah.
need to pipe it away, or how would it work?
No, it will be on the same site, so it would be right there. So it would be all the infrastructure would be localized to that activity. And in fact, the reason I'm here with these lovely curtains is that just down the road from me now is the company that we have an agreement with to actually look at the processing. So I'm here to talk to them about how it could look. And so it's yeah, everything would be centralized.
Who's going to use this cleaner helium?
I think that likely customers, like, it's a fairly small group of people out there, but the ones would be uh, MRI manufacturing companies, semiconductor fabricators. Space launch is a big one. Space uses helium as a pressuring agent in its fuel tanks. So it would be some of the technology names that we're probably quite familiar with.
And in terms of where we're going with net zero, you think its main use would be in things like helping, data centers that run renewable energy, or, doing all the kind of back end stuff of rather than a helium energy plant. There won't be anything like that. But would it be in other things? Would it perhaps be able to change certain materials that we're using from the fossil fuel industry in the manufacture of, I don't know, photovoltaics or kind of wind turbines or other, you talked about fusion. Could it find its way ancillary into the sort of energy generation side?
I think so. I think that from certainly from the fabrication of the components of the technologies you mentioned, yes, it's definitely required there. And then the other thing would be efficiency improvements. So if we had a more of an abundance of helium, we could use it more liberally. Then I think that would be great for how do I put it, for better electrical conductivity is a big one for helium. Colder temperatures helps with that. For reducing energy requirements or loss of heat. That's where I see it having its role. But also more abundant helium. I'm actually quite fascinated. I've been in this industry now for about 10 years, and each year there's always something new where helium's being considered as a use in a new form of technical application. Like there was this amazing one regarding drones that I saw, and they were talking about, well, let's go back to the big model of having the blimps again, and that could be a mothership for then all these little drones. And so you've got warehouses for, big real estate companies in the sky. It's like, wow, okay, right. So there's another one knocking on the door.
Tom, this sounds like Independence Day, the mothership.
It's a bit spooky me. I'm concerned that we might not be able to see the sun anymore if that thing's in the sky. But yeah, there are all sorts of interesting applications out there.
I mean, it's fascinating. Well, I mean, obviously, you look, there's the money side, which is brilliant, and I wish you all the best that you get to revenue and all that. But there's quite a fascinating science story here. What's driven you into this?
It was 10 years ago. I was, as a humble geologist, I was wandering around in the African bush, whereas, I was living in Tanzania at the time, and came across this old report where people were looking for hydrocarbons, and buried in there was that they were unsuccessful, but this particular reservoir was filled with helium. I was like, wow, I've never even considered this as a possibility. So then dug into it, learned more, educated myself, and my colleagues did the same. And I just thought, how neat is this? Like to something the world really needs, something that's for technology, something that you have the opportunity to go out and extract a resource with, next to no footprint. I personally thought it was too good to be true at the very beginning. And I'm pleased to say 10 years later, it's an industry that I'm very passionate about and very happy to be in. And there's not many of us. So it's really an opportunity to, be at the forefront of a new commodity rush. And I never saw it coming. So for me, it's exciting. It's the thrill of the chase and the ability to contribute to society. So it's a privilege.
I think it's brilliant, and overall, we need this stuff, like you said. Um, I suppose the goal is if you can reduce the impact on the planet in getting it, that's a really good thing.
It really is. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I wish you luck. I hope you get the find, the gold rush of the helium rush. I hope you get to stay in a nicer hotel next time. But it's been an absolute pleasure, Tom. Thank you so much. I assume your website is Pulsar.
Pulsarhelium.com. And yeah, look, and there, anybody wants to know more can easily get in contact with me as well. But, look, just what an honor. Thanks very much for having me.
An honor. It's mine, mate.
Yeah, an honor.
I love science. It's great. Thank you so much. Brilliant. And best of luck with it all, right? Let us know if you find it, by the way.
100%.
Do let us know.
That'd be lovely. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to Tom. And if you've got a thought about what we talked about, helium, the lighter way to fly, maybe the lighter way, I couldn't think, what was it, your pun? It was a very good one anyway. But get in touch with social media. Give us a line if you want to be on the podcast, Net Hero at futurenetzero.com. Until the next episode, from me and so he did the production. Thank you very much.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.